swarm urbanism. We know from Stephen Johnson's book on emergence, the book that connects the behavior of ants, brains, cities, and software, that we can see comparisons to be made between the swarming behavior of birds and cities themselves. But how is this manifested in actual urbanism? We could take this example perhaps as being a manifestation of that swarm intelligence. Here, an island in Greece, a little village in that island of Greece, you can see how the individual units, the agents, as it were, within this context, are themselves kind of aggregating and manifesting a form of swarm intelligence. They are, as it were, going roughly in the same direction and keeping a certain distance. They're actually adjacent to one another in a similar way to how birds flock together in a flocking behavior. What is interesting about this is you're going to find these manifestations in the less self-conscious forms of urbanism. You're not going to find it in the kind of the architecture where each of the individual buildings wants to stand out from its context. Rather, you're going to find it in the kind of favelas that you might find in Brazil or indeed throughout South America, where there is a kind of unself-conscious sort of form of urbanism that spreads everywhere. We might also see it in the hutongs in China, a similar kind of condition that manifests itself. And elsewhere, also here in Saudi Arabia, we can see a kind of a form of kind of a background condition whereby each of the agents, each of the blocks here is kind of behaving roughly in a similar way to a kind of swarm logic. This is an example, as it were, of swarm urbanism. And this is a view of Marrakesh where you can see the extraordinary way in which this manifests itself. Again, it is in the unself-conscious forms of traditional vernacular architecture that we are most likely to find this kind of pattern making, rather in the kind of the more self-conscious forms of contemporary architectural discourse. We can also maybe trace a form of emergent behavior in the whole history of architecture. It is, after all, a kind of incremental variation on an initial condition whereby we can see a shift from say Greek architecture to Roman architecture, from Roman architecture to the Romanesque, from the Romanesque to the Gothic, from the Gothic to the Renaissance, from the Renaissance to the Mannerist, to the Baroque, to the Neoclassical, and so on. You can almost read the whole history of architecture as being an emergent phenomenon. Likewise, you can begin to see how certain typologies emerge. Here, the typology of the Swiss chalet. There are certain fundamental conditions that dictate how that form emerges. On the one hand, the slope of the roof, shallow enough to retain the snow to form some kind of insulation in winter. On the other hand, aspects such as the length of the trees and how long the timber can be, but equally the kind of behaviours that go on inside a Swiss chalet, the kind of space that's required, for example, for a Swiss family to have a fondue on a Sunday night. All these factors kind of collectively add up and start to generate an emergent phenomenon, the notion of the typology of the Swiss chalet. Interestingly, Kevin Kelly points to towards how the logic of swarm intelligence, the logic of emergence, is behind many things, especially the way that the market operates. The market, for him, is out of control. It's based on a series of bottom-up operations that no one is in charge of. Let's take the example of somebody buying a pair of Nike sneakers. Maybe everyone before that was buying Adidas or Puma. Then all of a sudden there is a shift in the market as everyone starts copying everyone else and some emerging market trend appears. And this, of course, applies to all forms of aspects of cultural behavior, not least in architecture, where certain trends start emerging and people start copying each other. The logic of emergence then is in some ways absolutely fundamental to the logic of how architecture operates, not only to its history, to its typologies, but also to the way in which the whole discourse of architecture works.